The morning shift change on Harmony Station brought its usual crowd of tired workers and fresh replacements. Among them, a hooded figure moved through the busy corridors without attracting attention. The figure carried a small data pad and walked, with purpose, toward the restricted sections of the massive space station. David Rivers finished his morning coffee in the diplomatic quarters, unaware that his death had already been purchased. The human ambassador had become accustomed to the strange rhythms of station life over the past 6 months. While other species needed special atmosphere controls or gravity adjustments, humans seemed to adapt to almost any environment the station provided. 3 levels below, in a section that officially did not exist on any station map, the hooded figure entered a dark room. The walls were lined with weapons from dozens of worlds, and shadows moved in corners where light never reached. This was the domain of the Shadow Syndicate, the galaxy's most feared group of killers for hire. The figure removed its hood, revealing the scaled face of a Saurid diplomat. Ambassador Hexus had traveled far from the Saurid homeworlds for this meeting. His yellow eyes glowed with anger as he spoke to the darkness. "The human must die," Hexus said to the empty air. His words poisoned the minds of the Council. Every day. More species listened to his ideas about cooperation and shared resources. The humans spread like a disease through our galaxy. From the shadows stepped a creature that seemed made of darkness itself. Wraith was the Syndicate's best assassin, a being whose true form remained unknown even to those who hired him. Some said he was a shapeshifter from the void between stars. Others believed he was a failed experiment in shadow manipulation. None dared ask directly. "The price for killing a council member is high." Wraith's voice seemed to come from everywhere, at once. Especially one under diplomatic protection. Hexus placed a credit chip on the metal table between them. 1 million standard credits. Half now, half when the human stops breathing. Wraith examined the chip with sensors that glowed red in the darkness. "Tell me about this human. What makes him special enough to risk war with his species, the Saurid?" Ambassador laughed, a harsh sound like scraping metal. "Nothing makes him special. That is exactly the problem. David Rivers is completely ordinary by human standards. Yet he speaks of impossible things as if they were simple facts. He claims humans can live on worlds that would kill most species in minutes. He says they recover from injuries that would permanently disable our strongest warriors. The other species begin to believe these lies. And you think killing him will solve this problem? His death will show the galaxy that humans are not the miracle species they pretend to be. They bleed and die like any other creature. Fear will replace fascination, and the expansion of humanity will stop before it threatens our empire." Wraith moved closer, his form shifting like smoke. "I have studied many species in my centuries of work. The humans interest me. They come from a world they call Earth, which their own scientists classify as unusually hostile to life. Yet they thrive there and spread to other hostile worlds with ease. Perhaps there is more to them than you believe." Hexus slammed his clawed hand on the table. "Impossible. I have seen their anatomy charts. They have no natural armor, no venomous fangs, no ability to survive in vacuum. They are soft creatures from a moderate world. Any child from the heavy gravity worlds could crush, one with bare hands." The assassin was quiet for a long moment, considering. "Very well. I accept your contract, but I warn you, Saurid. If these humans prove more dangerous than expected, the price may go higher than credits." "Just kill him," Hexus growled. "Use poison, explosives, or a simple blade. One dead human will teach the galaxy that they are nothing special." After the Saurid left, Wraith remained in the darkness of his chamber. He activated a holographic display and began studying everything known about human physiology. Their medical records showed impressive healing rates and resistance to diseases that devastated other species. Their military records demonstrated unusual endurance and adaptability in combat situations. Most interesting were the reports from worlds where humans had established colonies. They seemed to thrive on planets that other species found barely habitable. Worlds with thin atmospheres, extreme temperatures, or hostile wildlife became productive human settlements within years. Wraith had killed members of every major species in the galaxy. The mighty titans from high-gravity worlds fell to precise strikes against their armored weak points. The ethereal crystals shattered when their energy matrices were disrupted. The aquatic depths died when removed from their liquid environments. But humans presented a puzzle. They had no obvious weak points, no single environmental requirement, no critical organ that could be easily targeted. Their bodies seemed designed for survival rather than specialization. Interesting, Wraith whispered to himself. Perhaps this contract will prove more challenging than most. The assassin began to plan his approach. Ambassador Rivers followed a predictable routine, making him easy to observe and target. He attended council sessions, diplomatic meetings, and cultural events with various species. Unlike other ambassadors who traveled with heavy security details, Rivers moved through the station with only minimal protection. This casual attitude toward safety would have seemed foolish for most species. High-ranking officials from other worlds required environmental suits, armed guards, and careful route planning to avoid hostile encounters. Rivers walked the corridors as if the massive space station was his neighborhood back on Earth. Wraith decided to start with poison, the most reliable method for eliminating targets quietly. He had access to toxins that could kill any known species within minutes of exposure. The human would never know what hit him. As the artificial night cycle began on Harmony Station, Wraith made his final preparations. Tomorrow, the human ambassador would die, and the galaxy would learn that Earth's children were no different from any other species. They could be killed just as easily as anyone else. The assassin did not yet understand that he was about to discover why humans had survived and thrived on one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy. David Rivers and his species were about to demonstrate exactly what made them so difficult to kill. The water recycling systems on Harmony Station processed millions of gallons every day. Technicians rarely paid attention to routine maintenance requests, especially when they came with proper authorization codes. Wraith had spent decades learning to forge the digital signatures of station officials, making his infiltration of critical systems almost effortless. He stood in the utility corridors beneath the diplomatic quarters, holding a vial of Novan toxin. The clear liquid looked harmless, like ordinary water, but 3 drops could kill a Titan warrior in less than 5 minutes. For a soft human, even a single drop should prove fatal within seconds. The assassin located the water line feeding directly to Ambassador Rivers' quarters. With practiced precision, he injected the entire contents of the vial into the supply pipe. The toxin would mix with the human's drinking water, cooking water, and shower supply. There would be no escape from exposure. Wraith retreated to a safe observation point and activated monitoring devices he had placed throughout Rivers' quarters the night before. Now he would wait and watch as the human discovered why crossing the Saurid Empire carried a deadly price. David Rivers woke early, as was his habit from growing up on a farm in the American Midwest. The artificial morning light of his quarters felt nothing like the sunrise over cornfields, but his body had adapted to station time within weeks of arrival. He made his way to the small kitchen area and filled a glass with water from the tap. The monitoring devices recorded everything as Rivers drank the entire glass without hesitation. Wraith watched the screens intently, expecting to see the human collapse within moments. Novan toxin attacked the nervous system directly, causing paralysis and respiratory failure in every species tested. Minutes passed. Rivers moved around his quarters normally, showering and preparing for the day's diplomatic meetings. He drank coffee made with the poisoned water and ate breakfast without showing any signs of distress. An hour later, the human left his quarters and walked to the council chambers. His step was steady, his breathing normal, and his color healthy. Wraith began to wonder if the toxin had somehow failed to mix properly with the water supply. The morning council session proceeded as usual. Rivers presented humanity's proposal for joint exploration of the Outer Rim territories, speaking clearly and confidently for 2 hours. Other ambassadors asked detailed questions about human colonization methods and resource-sharing agreements. The human answered every question without missing a beat. During the lunch break, Wraith checked his monitoring equipment twice. The readings confirmed that massive amounts of Novan toxin had been consumed by the target. By all scientific understanding, David Rivers should have been dead before finishing his morning shower. The afternoon session brought more surprises. Rivers actually seemed more energetic than usual, presenting detailed charts and statistical analyses with enthusiasm. He laughed at jokes from the insectoid ambassador and engaged in friendly debate with representatives from the aquatic worlds. As evening approached, Wraith finally detected some change in the human's behavior. Rivers rubbed his stomach occasionally and declined an invitation to dinner with other diplomats, mentioning that he felt slightly nauseous. But instead of collapsing in agony as expected, the human simply returned to his quarters and made himself some tea. The assassin watched in growing disbelief as Rivers spent the evening reading reports and answering messages. The human showed no signs of the paralysis, convulsions, or respiratory distress that Novan toxin caused in other species. He seemed to be treating potentially fatal poisoning as nothing more than mild indigestion. By the next morning, even the slight nausea had disappeared. Rivers woke refreshed and returned to his normal routine as if nothing had happened. Medical scans showed no trace of the toxin in his system. Wraith retreated to his hidden chamber to research what had gone wrong. He accessed medical databases from across the galaxy, searching for any species that showed resistance to Novan toxin. The results were clear. No known creature could survive the dose he had administered to the human. Further investigation into human biology revealed surprising information. Earth's ecosystem contained thousands of naturally occurring toxins in plants, fungi, and animals. Humans had evolved alongside these poisons for millions of years, developing liver and kidney systems capable of processing and neutralizing chemical threats that would devastate other species. What seemed like an ordinary human organ turned out to be a sophisticated chemical processing facility. Rivers' liver had simply treated the alien poison as another toxin to be broken down and eliminated. His kidneys had flushed the neutralized compounds from his system overnight. The medical databases contained reports from human colonies on various worlds. Again and again, humans had encountered local poisonous species and survived exposures that killed other colonists from different species. The humans often described these encounters as getting sick or having a bad reaction, as if near-death poisoning was a minor inconvenience. Wraith began to understand that he had seriously underestimated his target. The Saurid who hired him had been wrong about human fragility. These creatures from Earth had survived on a world that apparently tried to poison them on a regular basis. But poison was only one tool in the assassin's collection. If chemical attacks failed, he would try something more direct. Cutting off the human's air supply should work regardless of how efficient his liver might be. The assassin began planning his second attempt. This time, he would attack Rivers' ability to breathe rather than his ability to process toxins. Surely no amount of evolutionary adaptation could allow a mammal to survive without oxygen. Wraith had killed aquatic species by draining their water, flying species by damaging their wings, and energy beings by disrupting their power sources. Every creature had an environmental requirement that could be targeted. Humans needed oxygen like every other carbon-based life form. Remove that requirement, and even the most adapted Earth creature would die within minutes. The assassin spent the rest of the day studying the station's life support systems, looking for ways to create a fatal accident in the diplomatic quarters. Tomorrow would bring a more direct test of human durability. As he planned, Wraith found himself developing a grudging respect for his target. Any creature that could shrug off lethal poisoning deserved more careful consideration. The humans were clearly tougher than their appearance suggested. But tough or not, they still needed to breathe. Maintenance alerts were common on a space station the size of Harmony. With thousands of systems operating continuously, something always needed repair or adjustment. The night shift workers barely glanced at the work order authorizing emergency. Repairs to the life support system in the diplomatic sector. Wraith moved through the service tunnels with the confidence of someone who belonged there. His shape-shifting abilities allowed him to appear as any species. And tonight he wore the form of a maintenance technician from the insectoid worlds. The compound eyes and extra arms made complex repairs look routine while hiding his true identity. He reached the central control node for Ambassador Rivers' quarters just after midnight. The human would be asleep, making him vulnerable to what would appear to be a tragic accident. Wraith had studied similar incidents on other stations where life support failures led to quiet deaths with no questions asked. The assassin began his work methodically. First, he disabled the emergency backup systems that would normally activate if primary life support failed. Then he rerouted the air circulation to reverse flow, pulling breathable atmosphere out of the quarters instead of pumping it in. Finally, he opened valves that would flood the sealed room with industrial cleaning gases toxic to most carbon-based life. Within minutes, the oxygen levels in Rivers' quarters would drop to near zero, while poisonous fumes built up to lethal concentrations. Even if the human somehow woke up and realized what was happening, he would have no way to escape the sealed diplomatic suite. Wraith activated the sequence and moved to a monitoring position where he could watch the results. The modified sensors in the room would record everything, providing proof of the human's death for his sordid employer. This time, there would be no mysterious survival. The first sign of trouble appeared on his display screens almost immediately. The atmospheric readings showed oxygen levels dropping as expected, but the human's vital signs remained stable. Rivers was clearly awake, yet his heart rate had actually slowed rather than accelerated in panic. Through the hidden cameras, Wraith watched the human sit up in bed and sniff the air calmly. Instead of gasping or struggling to breathe, Rivers got up and walked to his computer terminal. The toxic gases should have been causing severe respiratory distress by now, but the human showed no signs of poisoning. Rivers spent several minutes at his computer, apparently diagnosing the life support malfunction with the casual efficiency of someone solving a minor technical problem. The assassin watched in amazement as his target seemed to hold his breath while working, yet showed no signs of oxygen deprivation. What happened next defied everything Wraith knew about biological limitations. The human opened an emergency toolkit and began making repairs to the very systems the assassin had sabotaged. Working in an atmosphere that should have been instantly fatal, Rivers methodically restored proper airflow and neutralized the toxic gas buildup. The entire repair process took nearly 4 minutes. During that time, the human barely breathed at all, yet maintained perfect coordination and clear thinking. When other species held their breath, they became sluggish and confused. Within a minute, Rivers worked as if oxygen deprivation was a minor distraction. Most remarkably, when the repairs were complete and fresh air began flowing again, the human did not gasp or gulp for oxygen. He simply resumed normal breathing and returned to bed, as if nothing unusual had happened. Wraith stared at his monitors in complete disbelief. The readings confirmed that Rivers had been exposed to gas concentrations that would have killed a Titan warrior in seconds. The oxygen levels had dropped so low that most species would have lost consciousness immediately. Yet somehow the human had not only survived, but had efficiently repaired the damaged systems. The assassin began researching human respiratory capabilities immediately. What he found challenged every assumption about mammalian biology. Humans possessed unusual breath-holding abilities compared to similar species, with some individuals capable of surviving without air for over 10 minutes. More importantly, Human. Blood carried oxygen much more efficiently than that of other mammals. Their red blood cells could store and release oxygen in ways that allowed continued brain function even when breathing stopped. This adaptation apparently came from their ancestors who had to swim underwater to escape predators or hunt for food. The medical databases revealed even more surprising information. Humans regularly engaged in activities that would be considered suicidal by other species. They held their breath underwater for sport, climbed mountains where oxygen levels were dangerously low, and worked in environments that required artificial breathing apparatus. What amazed Wraith most was that humans seemed to view these extreme conditions as recreational activities. They actually sought out situations that tested their survival capabilities, treating life-threatening challenges as entertainment. Reports from human colonies described settlers working in thin atmospheres that left other species gasping for breath. The humans simply adapted their work schedules to account for reduced oxygen, continuing their tasks with typical persistence. The assassin realized that he was dealing with a species that had evolved on a world where the ability to survive without breathing was a regular necessity. Whether escaping underwater predators, enduring high-altitude conditions, or surviving in toxic environments, humans had developed biological systems that treated oxygen shortage as a temporary inconvenience. As dawn approached on Harmony Station, Wraith faced the uncomfortable truth that his second assassination attempt had failed even more completely than the first. Not only had Rivers survived, he had actually fixed the sabotaged systems and gone back to sleep. The human embassy would likely investigate the life support malfunction, but they would find evidence of mechanical failure rather than sabotage. Rivers himself seemed to consider the incident too minor to report, treating a near-death experience as routine maintenance. Wraith began planning his third attempt with growing respect for his target. Chemical attacks failed because humans could process toxins that killed other species. Environmental attacks failed because they could survive in conditions that were instantly fatal to most life forms. Perhaps it was time for a more direct approach. Every species had physical limitations that could be exploited with sufficient force. The assassin would test human durability with blades and impact weapons rather than subtle poisons or environmental hazards. After all, no amount of evolutionary adaptation could protect soft flesh from sharp metal. Even the toughest species in the galaxy could be killed with enough direct violence. Wraith spent the morning acquiring weapons suitable for close combat. Tomorrow night, he would discover whether human resilience extended to surviving physical trauma that would destroy any other creature. The diplomatic banquet hall buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages as representatives from 47 species gathered for the monthly cultural exchange dinner. Wraith moved among the servers wearing the form of a tall, slender being from the outer rim worlds. His shape-shifting abilities made infiltration almost trivial, especially when most attendees were focused on the exotic foods and political discussions. Ambassador Rivers sat at the main table between the crystalline delegate from Prism Station and a massive armored creature from the heavy gravity worlds. The human appeared relaxed and friendly, sharing stories about Earth, customs while sampling dishes from various homeworlds. He showed no awareness that death was planning to visit him before dessert was served. Wraith had chosen this setting carefully. The crowded room would provide confusion and multiple escape routes after the kill was completed. More importantly, the public nature of the assassination would send a clear message to other species about what happened to those who opposed Saurid interests. The assassin carried monomolecular blades concealed within his server's uniform. These weapons could cut through the strongest armor used by military forces across the galaxy. Against unprotected human flesh, they would slice through bone and organ tissue like it was empty air. As the main course was served, Wraith positioned himself behind River's chair. The human was laughing at something the crystalline delegate had said, completely unaware of the danger approaching from behind. The other diners were absorbed in their own conversations, creating perfect conditions for a quick, fatal strike. Wraith activated his blades and moved forward with the speed that had made him the galaxy's most feared assassin. The monomolecular edges would slice through the human's neck and spine before his nervous system could even register the attack. Death would be instantaneous and inevitable. The first blade passed within inches of River's throat when something unexpected happened. The human moved, not with the reflexes of a trained warrior or the enhanced speed of a combat species, but with a sudden burst of coordinated motion that seemed to come from nowhere. Rivers threw himself sideways out of his chair while somehow grabbing the assassin's wrist in the same movement. The monomolecular blade missed its target and instead sliced harmlessly through empty air where the human's head had been a split second before. Other diners began screaming and running as they realized violence had erupted in their midst. But Wraith found himself completely focused on his target, who had not only survived the surprise attack, but was now fighting back with disturbing effectiveness. The human's grip on his wrist felt like a mechanical clamp. Rivers was not particularly large or muscled compared to warrior species, yet his fingers seemed capable of crushing bone. More disturbing was the change in the human's eyes. The friendly, diplomatic expression had vanished, replaced by something that reminded Wraith of a predator that had just spotted prey. Rivers twisted the assassin's arm with a motion that should have been impossible for his anatomy. Wraith felt his disguised form losing cohesion as pain disrupted his shape-shifting concentration. He struck out with his second blade, aiming for the human's chest. Again, Rivers moved with that strange combination of speed and precision. He caught the second blade between his palms, stopping the monomolecular edge just inches from his heart. Blood ran from his hands where the weapon cut into his flesh, yet he showed no sign of pain or weakening. What happened next defied every assumption Wraith had made about human limitations. Instead of trying to escape or call for help, Rivers pressed forward into the attack. He used his bleeding hands to control both weapons while driving his knee into the assassin's midsection with enough force to crack ribs. The impact sent Wraith staggering backward, his shape-shifted form flickering as pain overwhelmed his concentration. He found himself looking into human eyes that showed no fear, no desperation, and no intention of retreat. Rivers was not fighting to survive. He was fighting to win. Security forces finally arrived as the two combatants crashed into a serving table, scattering exotic foods across the floor. But instead of finding a victim in need of rescue, they discovered the human ambassador systematically dismantling one of the galaxy's most dangerous killers with his bare hands. Wraith tried to disengage and escape, but Rivers would not let him go. The human pursued every retreat with relentless pressure, absorbing cuts and impacts that should have crippled him while continuing to attack with mechanical persistence. Most disturbing was the human's refusal to acknowledge his injuries. Monomolecular. Cuts had sliced through muscle and scraped against bone, yet Rivers continued moving as if his wounds were minor scratches. Blood loss that would have weakened other species seemed to have no effect on his strength or coordination. The fight ended when station security finally managed to stun the assassin with electromagnetic weapons. Wraith collapsed to the floor, his true shadow-like form finally visible as his shape-shifting abilities failed completely. He was barely conscious, having sustained damage that would take weeks to heal. Rivers stood over the defeated assassin, breathing hard but still upright. Despite injuries that should have required immediate medical attention, his diplomatic suit was torn and blood-stained. His hands were severely cut from grabbing monomolecular blades, and impact damage from the fight should have left him unable to stand. Instead, he calmly provided a statement to security while medical teams worked on his wounds. The doctors were amazed by what they found. Human blood clotted faster than expected, forming seals over the worst cuts within minutes. His bone structure had absorbed impacts that would have shattered the skeletons of most species. Most remarkable was his attitude toward the injuries. Rivers treated severe lacerations and possible internal damage as minor inconveniences, remaining alert and cooperative throughout the medical examination. He even expressed concern about completing his scheduled meetings the next day. Dr. Vell, the insectoid physician treating his wounds, had to explain that most species would need weeks of recovery from such trauma. Rivers seemed genuinely surprised by this information, mentioning that he had experienced worse injuries during recreational activities on Earth. The assassination attempt became the talk of Harmony Station within hours. Wraith, once considered the most dangerous killer in known space, had been defeated by an unarmed diplomat using nothing but determination and an apparent inability to recognize when he was supposed to be dead. In his cell, the broken assassin tried to understand what had gone wrong. The human had moved faster than his species was supposed to be capable of, fought longer than his physiology should have allowed, and ignored damage that would have incapacitated any reasonable creature. Most unsettling was the memory of those predator eyes. For a brief moment during the fight, Wraith had seen past the diplomatic facade to something much older and more dangerous. Rivers had not been defending himself. He had been hunting. The assassin began to suspect that the Saurid Empire had made a terrible mistake in targeting humanity. These were not the soft, fragile creatures they appeared to be. They were something far more dangerous, disguised as peaceful diplomats. The medical bay of Harmony Station had never hosted such an unusual gathering of species. Word of the assassination attempt had spread throughout the diplomatic community, and representatives from dozens of worlds wanted to understand how a human had survived what should have been a fatal encounter with the galaxy's most feared killer. Dr. Vell worked efficiently on Ambassador Rivers' wounds while explaining her findings to the assembled crowd. The insectoid physician had treated injuries from every major species in the galaxy, but human physiology continued to surprise her with each scan and test. The damage should have been catastrophic, she said, her multiple arms working various medical instruments simultaneously. Monomolecular weapons create cuts so precise they prevent normal blood clotting. Most species would have bled to death within minutes of sustaining these injuries. Rivers sat patiently on the examination table, looking more concerned about the diplomatic implications of the attack than his own physical condition. His hands were wrapped in regenerative bandages, and several deeper cuts required synthetic skin grafts, but he remained alert and active throughout the treatment process. "I have examined the security recordings from the banquet hall," continued Dr. Vell. "The human sustained 17 separate lacerations, 3 impact injuries that should have fractured ribs, and blood loss equivalent to approximately 15% of total blood volume. Any other species would have lost consciousness from shock alone." The crystalline delegate from Prism Station spoke up, her voice creating harmonics that translated as deep confusion. "How is such resilience possible? Our medical databases indicate that humans lack the armored skin of heavy world species or the redundant organ systems of aquatic forms. They appear to be standard carbon-based mammals." Dr. Vell paused in her work to access a holographic display, showing comparative anatomy charts. "That assumption has proven incorrect. While human skin appears vulnerable, it is actually composed of multiple layers with remarkable healing properties. Their blood contains clotting factors that work far more efficiently than our models predicted." She highlighted sections of the display showing human internal structure. More significantly, their skeletal system is designed to absorb and distribute impact forces in ways that protect vital organs. What appeared to be solid bone impacts actually dispersed energy throughout their entire frame. The massive delegate from the heavy gravity worlds leaned forward, his armored bulk creaking. "But surely the blood loss should have caused weakness or disorientation. Our warriors cannot function effectively after losing even 10% of blood volume." "Human cardiovascular systems operate on different principles," Dr. Vell explained. "They possess multiple backup mechanisms for maintaining blood pressure and oxygen delivery. When blood volume drops, their heart rate increases while blood vessels constrict to maintain flow to critical organs. They can remain functional at blood loss levels that would cause other species to collapse. Rivers finally spoke up, his voice carrying the slight hoarseness that came from physical exertion. "Doctor, you make it sound like we are unusual. These are normal responses for any human. We experience similar situations regularly during recreational activities on Earth." The room fell silent at this statement. The idea that near-fatal injuries could be considered recreational was beyond the comprehension of most species present. Dr. Vell accessed more files from human medical databases. Ambassador Rivers is correct. Human recreational activities include many situations that other species would classify as life-threatening emergencies. They deliberately engage in activities that test their physical limitations. She displayed images from Earth showing humans climbing vertical rock faces, swimming in freezing water, and running extreme distances across hostile terrain. What they call sports, we would classify as survival training for military specialists. The aquatic delegate from the deep worlds rippled with disbelief. These activities serve no practical purpose beyond testing survival capabilities. Why would any species voluntarily subject themselves to such stress? Because their world taught them that such stress was normal, Dr. Vell replied. I have been studying Earth's environmental data since treating the ambassador. Their planet has subjected them to constant survival challenges for millions of years. The holographic display shifted to show Earth's climate history, geological activity, and biological diversity. The assembled delegates stared at data that painted a picture of a world that seemed determined to kill everything living on its surface. Ice, ages that lasted thousands of years. Volcanic eruptions that blocked sunlight for decades. Earthquakes, floods, storms, and temperature variations that would be considered catastrophic on most worlds. Yet humans not only survived these conditions, they thrived and spread across their entire planet. Dr. Vell highlighted Earth's biological diversity. Their world contains thousands of species that produce toxins capable of killing most galactic life forms. Predators with strength, speed, and weapons that exceed anything found on peaceful worlds. Diseases that mutate and adapt faster than medical countermeasures can be developed. The sordid delegate, who had remained quiet throughout the examination, finally spoke. You are saying their entire species has been shaped by constant warfare with their own planet. Precisely. Every human carries genetic modifications developed through millions of years of surviving impossible conditions. Their immune systems can identify and counter threats that would devastate species from more stable worlds. Their healing abilities have been refined through countless generations of recovering from injuries that would be permanently disabling elsewhere. Dr. Vell turned to address Rivers directly. Ambassador, what you demonstrated tonight was not exceptional human capability. It was simply ordinary human survival instincts responding to a threat situation. Rivers nodded thoughtfully. My grandfather used to say that Earth never lets you get comfortable. Every season brings new challenges, and you either adapt or you do not survive to pass on your genes. The medical bay was quiet as the implications of this information settled over the assembled delegates. They had been thinking of humans as just another species seeking expansion into galactic civilization. The reality was that they were dealing with creatures forged by one of the most hostile worlds in known space. There is one more factor that makes humans particularly difficult to kill, Dr. Vell continued. Their psychological response to life-threatening situations is unique among studied species. Most creatures experience fear, panic, or resignation when faced with overwhelming odds. Humans respond with increased aggression and determination. She replayed sections of the security recording, highlighting Rivers' behavior during the fight. Notice that he never attempts to flee or calls for help. His response to a deadly attack is to counterattack more aggressively. This is not trained behavior or conscious decision-making. It is genetic programming developed through millions of years of predator-prey relationships. The heavy gravity delegate spoke slowly, his voice carrying new respect. You are describing a species of natural warriors disguised as peaceful diplomats. Not warriors, Rivers corrected gently. Survivors. We learned long ago that the universe is a dangerous place, and the only reliable protection is the ability to endure whatever challenges arise. We do not seek conflict, but we do not fear it either. In the detention cells below the medical bay, Wraith listened to the broadcast of Dr. Vell's presentation through the station's communication system. Every word confirmed what he had discovered through painful experience. The humans were not the weak species they appeared to be. The assassin understood now why his contract had failed so completely. He had been hired to kill a creature that had been shaped by millions of years of surviving professional killers. Poison, environmental hazards, and direct violence were simply ordinary challenges for a species from a death world. As news of the failed assassination spread throughout the galaxy, the reputation of humanity began to change. Species that had viewed them as interesting newcomers started to recognize them as something far more significant. They were survivors from a world that had tried everything to kill them, and failed. The Saurid Empire quietly withdrew their objections to human expansion, unwilling to face a species that treated attempted murder as a diplomatic inconvenience. Other potential enemies reconsidered their plans, recognizing that creatures who could not be killed by poison, suffocation, or blade might prove difficult to conquer. David Rivers returned to his quarters that evening, applied medical gel to his bandaged hands, and continued reading his reports for the next day's council session. Just another day for a human from the death world called Earth.